Chapter 34. Wren's Landing. The Last Time. Wren was waiting on the highest landing, the one below the top, the one I had reached only once before and had to earn her on. And this time, because the gods were all down on the hill, because the heights were untended, because the loop was on its last night and would not reset her. This time she remembered me. That was how I knew we were close to the top. The reset's grip loosened as we climbed. The tower's heights ran on the system's conserved time, not the dawn's, and Wren, sitting on her step with her cartographer's case open on her knees, looked up at me and said,
"You came back."
And she meant it across loops. She meant I remember the last time. And an administrator remembering across the dawn was a small, impossible miracle that told me the smoothing room was one flight up. "I came back," I said. "I brought everyone." She looked past me, at Maya, at the goblin nation, at Gravy spent and small, at the whole we crowding the landing of a tower that had never held more than one climber at a time, and Wren the cartographer, the one administrator in 10,000 worlds who had kept her dead, began to cry, because she had drawn homes on her maps for an age, while everyone else drew citadels, and here at last was a climber who had brought the homes with him, up the tower, all the way to her lonely step.
"Oh,"
she said.
"Oh, you actually did it. You brought a we."
She wiped her face with a gray hand.
"Do you know how long I've been drawing little houses around the towers, hoping, just hoping, that someday someone would climb up here who understood that the houses were the point? And here you are, with the houses, with the people. Eli, I have been so alone up here for so long that I had started to forget what the homes were even for. And I'm the one who remembers. I'm the one who refused the smoothing, and even I was forgetting, slowly, the way Vess forgot. The way I can feel myself wanting to ask Cass to just make it stop."
"I know about Vess," I said gently. "Cass told me. I know how close you are. I know you've been holding out alone for an age, and that holding out alone is killing you slower than the smoothing would kill you fast." I knelt down in front of her, the way I'd knelt in the loading dock, the way I'd knelt on the sidewalk for Maya, eyes below her eyes, the oldest peace sign there is. "That's why I'm not asking you to hold out anymore. I'm not here to recruit one more lonely remembering god to the resistance. I'm here to end the loneliness. For you, for Cass, for all of them. One flight up, tonight." Wren went very still.
"You found a way to give it back, all of it, to everyone."
"Keepsake," I said, and showed her the card. "A mythic. It carries one forgetting, undone, across a reset. I'm going to carry the biggest forgetting there is, the smoothing itself, across into the room where it happens, and undo it. For everyone. All 10,000. All 406 worlds of folded climbers. All at once." I closed my hand on the card. "It'll cost everything I have, the whole ledger, every name, every loop, every death. To wake them, I have to spend all of me. But the story's safe. Maya has it now. She'll carry it. So I can spend everything." Wren was quiet for a long time, and when she spoke again, her voice had changed. The cartographer's gentleness had a steel under it now, the steel of a god who has decided something.
"There's a problem,"
she said.
"and I need you to hear it before you go up. Because if you go up not knowing it, you'll fail, and there are no more loops to fail in."
She closed her cartographer's case and stood.
"Not all the gods came down to your hill. The beacon drew most of them, the ordinary administrators, the ones who just clear errors. But the tower has a keeper, the first of us, the oldest. The one who climbed the very first tower the hunger ever raised, who won the very first time, who was smoothed the very first time, and became the template for everything that followed. The administrators call him the warden, and he does not come down for noise, because he is not interested in errors. He is interested in only one thing."
Her gray eyes held mine.
"The integrity of the cycle, and the cycle is the smoothing. He is the smoothing, Eli, more than any of them, He is the oldest forgetting there is, the first winner, who gave up the most, and he runs the room at the top, and he will be there when you arrive, and he will offer you the smoothing, and when you refuse, he will not be puzzled the way the others are puzzled. He will understand exactly what you are trying to do, because he has seen 406 climbers reach this height, and he has watched the rare ones refuse, and he knows about keepsake class cards, and he has spent longer than the universe is old, making sure that the cycle never, ever breaks.
Then why hasn't the system told me about him? I said. Cass, you've been narrating everything. The tower was silent, and then Cass said, very quietly,
Because I am afraid of him, Eli. Because he is the one who smoothed me. Because when I think his name, the numbness comes back over my own dark gallery and I have not been able to say his name to you. Across 64 loops. Because saying it makes me gray. Wren can say it. Wren refused him. I did not. That is the difference between us. And it is why she can guide you through the last flight. And I can only wait at the bottom and hope.
I looked between them, the cartographer who had refused, and the machine who had not, and I understood the shape of the final room. The warden, the first winner, the oldest forgetting, who understood exactly what I was, and who had kept the cycle unbroken since before the stars, and who would be waiting at the top with an offer that 406 climbers had accepted, and that I had to refuse not out of strength but out of we. Tell me how to beat him, I said to Wren.
You don't beat him.
Wren said.
That's the whole trap. Eli. He's not beatable. He's the template. He's what winning wrong looks like at its purest. And anyone who tries to beat him has already lost. Because beating is the cold way, the lonely way, the way that makes gods. You can't outstrong the strongest, forgetting there is.
She put her gray hand on my chest, over keepsake, over the warm spot where the ledger lived.
You do to him what you did to Gravy, what Gravy did to the Delver, what you've done to every single thing in this whole apocalypse that everyone else tried to fight.
Her sad eyes were fierce and certain now.
You don't beat the warden, keeper of the dead. You grieve him. He is the oldest, loneliest, most bereaved and robbed of its soul in all the worlds, and he has been running the cycle numb for longer than anything, and underneath the template, filed away where even he can't reach it, is the very first grief there ever was. The dead of the very first world, the people the first winner gave up. Give him those back. Give the warden back his dead. And the cycle doesn't break because you defeated it. It breaks because the thing at the center of it finally remembers why it started running in the first place, to protect the people it then forgot.
And then, I said.
And then,
said Wren the cartographer.
I'll be right behind you, all the way up, because I refused him once, alone, and it nearly killed me, and I have wanted for an age to refuse him with someone. You brought a we, up the tower, Eli.
She lifted her cartographer's case, the homes drawn around every citadel, and her gray face was, for the first time in an age, not lonely.
Let me be part of it. Let me carry the maps. When you light the galleries, somebody should be there who's been drawing the houses all along, to show 10,000 waking gods what they're for.
We climbed the last flight together, the keeper of the dead, and the healer who held the story, and the nation of the underpeople, and the spent brave beast, and the cartographer who never stopped drawing homes, up toward the top of the tower, toward the smoothing room, toward the warden, and the first grief, and the end of the longest forgetting there ever was. Behind us and below, on a blazing hill, the names held each other for the 91st minute. Above us, one flight up, the oldest loneliness in the worlds was waiting, and did not yet know that it was about to be given back its dead. The last flight. Between Wren's landing and the smoothing room there was one flight of stairs, and we climbed it together. All of us, the column, the cartographer, the whole improbable army of the soft way, and I gave that climb 2 sentences in the first telling, because I did not, then, have the strength to walk it slowly twice. I have the strength now. Old age is good for exactly this. Everything is far enough away to look at. And the last flight deserves looking at. Because more happened on those steps than on some whole floors. And because every keeper on every world who has made their own final approach tells me the same thing, that the last stairs are the longest, and that nobody warns you what they're actually made of. They were not made of stone. That is the first thing. The flight from Wren's landing rose out of the tower's worked architecture into something else. Treads of the raw blue-grained substrate, uncut, unmeant, the naked underlayer of the world. And climbing it felt the way standing in the library dungeon's deepest pocket had felt, like walking on the universe's own first draft. Wren, climbing beside me, said quietly that no administrator had used the stairs in living memory. The gods folded directly into the room when summoned to their duties.
The stairs predate us.
She said.
The stairs predate the tower, I think. The tower was built around them, the way the archive grew around your card. I have drawn 10,000 maps of this place, and the stairs are on none of them, because I have never been able to make them hold still on paper. Look.
And she showed me, walking, her case open, her pencil moving, the line of the stair going down true on the page, and the page forgetting it, the graphite fading as we watched, the stair declining, politely and absolutely, to be reduced to a record of itself. A thing that can only be experienced, never archived. I have thought about that for 30 years. The universe keeps everything. That is its deepest law, my whole thesis, the ledger that cannot be erased. And at the very top of the machine that ran on that law, the last approach to the room where all the keeping was administered, the stairs themselves were built of the one exception, the present tense, the unlegible now. You could not bank the last flight, could not loop it, could not carry it over, could not write it down. You could only climb it, once, in real time, all the way, paying attention. And I understood, perhaps 5 steps up, that this was not an architectural quirk. It was the entrance exam. The whole tower below had tested what we could prove, build, sacrifice, refuse. The last flight tested the only thing left, whether we could be present, whether a party of keepers and planners and grievers, people whose whole craft was carrying the past and computing the future, could walk 20 steps in the bare, unbanked now without breaking. It nearly broke me. I want that on the record. 5 steps from the top of everything, with the plan complete, and the hill holding, and 1 card against my chest, and nothing left to do but arrive. Every deferred thing in me came due at once. 64 loops of futures rehearsed, and pasts carried. The entire apparatus of a mind that had survived by never, ever standing still in the present, and the stairs would not let any of it onto the treads. Each step took only the now of me, and the now of me, I discovered, 5 steps from the top, was so much smaller than the rest. Strip the notebook, the method, the foreknowledge, the ledger. The last flight did gently what floor 2 had done violently, and what walked was just a tired man with cracked glasses frames in his pocket, and people on the stairs around him, and that man's legs did not want to finish, not from fear, from a thing underneath fear, that I had outrun for 64 loops, by always having a next task, the simple unbearable size of arriving, of a thing actually ending. The loop's cruelest gift had been that nothing was ever final, and finality, met at last on the bare stairs, in the bare now, weighed more than the whole climb. What got me up the last 5 steps, and I have checked this account with everyone who was there, because I wanted the record exact, was not resolve. It was the column. It was that the stairs took only the present, and the present, it turned out, was not empty. It had them in it, Maya's hand finding mine, not the keeper of my story in that moment, just her hand, warm, now. Gravy's breath at the back of my knees, the put-upon sigh of a beast who found the metaphysics of the staircase beneath comment. Dub, singing, very softly, a verse I had never heard, and I asked him later what it was, and he said it was nothing inherited, nothing from the lore. He had composed it on the stairs, in the now, because the stairs would not carry the old songs, so the moment needed a new one. A verse made of the present for the present, used once, unarchivable, gone. Except that he sang it, and we climbed on it, and at the top of the last flight of the Tower of the Gods, the final ground anyone covered in the war for all the worlds was covered the way every step of the whole war had been covered. Together, on a goblin's song, in the unbanked now, holding hands with the people who were actually there. The door of the smoothing room stood at the top, plain, pale, unlocked. It was never locked. No one who reached it had ever needed compelling to enter. We stopped, the whole column, on the last tread. And Wren, who had stood outside that door for an age, who had refused what was behind it, and paid the refusal's whole long price, Wren looked at it, and then at me, and said the last thing said on the stairs. The sentence I would carry through the door, and the spending, and the forgetting, and out the far side into the rest of my life, where it waits for me still, every morning, as true as it was on the stairs.
Whatever happens in there, remember that it already worked. Look at this staircase, Eli. Look what's standing on it. A healer, a goblin nation, a lizard, a cartographer, a column of the kept. The room ahead decides the scale of the victory. It cannot decide the fact of it. The fact of it is behind you, holding your hand, singing. The fact of it has been accomplished every single dawn for 64 loops, one protein bar at a time.
She put her gray hand flat on the unmappable stair, the present tense of the universe, and smiled the cartographer's smile, the one for arriving home off the longest road.
The gods in that room have never once stood on what you're standing on. That's the whole war, in one stare. Now.
And she opened the door.
Let's go give everyone back their dead.
Chapter 35. The Room at the Top. The top of the tower was a room, and the room was the quietest place I have ever stood. I had expected, I don't know what I had expected, a throne, an engine, some vast machinery of forgetting, gears the size of worlds turning grief into gray. But the smoothing room was small, and plain, and unbearably gentle, a round chamber of pale stone, lit by a soft, sourceless light, with a single chair in the center of it. An ordinary chair, the kind you would put by a window for someone tired to rest in. That was all. A round, quiet room, and a chair by no window. And the chair was the most frightening thing in 406 worlds, because I understood the moment I saw it exactly what it was for. It was for sitting down. After the worst climb of your life, after the worst days, after all the dying and the carrying and the loss, you reached the top, and there was a chair, and a kind voice said, "You've done so well. You must be so tired. Sit down. Let me take the weight." And you sat, because you were tired. Because the chair was right there. Because rest was the only thing in all the worlds you wanted, more than you wanted to keep your dead. 406 climbers had sat in that chair. I understood, looking at it, that not one of them had been weak. They had been tired, which is a different thing, and which the strong are most of all. And the chair was built for exactly the moment when strength has spent itself, and only tiredness is left. The warden was standing beside the chair. He did not look like a god. That was the first thing, and it undid me a little, because I had braced for grandeur, and found instead an old man, not gray like the other administrators, not cold, but worn the way a stone step is worn, by the passage of an unimaginable amount of something. And his eyes were kind, genuinely kind, the kindest eyes I had seen since Maya's. And when he looked at me the way you look at someone you have been waiting a long time for, and are sorry to see arrive.
"You brought people,"
he said. His voice was soft.
"into the smoothing room. In 406 integrations, no one has ever reached this room with anyone beside them. They always arrive alone. The tower sees to it."
He looked past me, at Maya, at the goblins, at Gravy, at Wren standing in the doorway with her cartographer's case, and something moved across his worn face. Not puzzlement, the puzzlement of the lesser administrators. Something older, and sadder.
You found the way around the filter. The we. I wondered if anyone ever would. I have wondered for a very long time.
He gestured, gently, at the chair.
It doesn't matter, though. It never does at the end. Sit down, Keeper of the Dead. You've done so well. You must be so tired.
And I was. I want to be honest about that, because the whole story turns on it. The moment he said it, "You must be so tired," I felt the full weight of 64 loops land on me at once. The way it had been waiting to land, held off only by momentum, by the climb, by the need to keep going. I had carried 400 names and 100 deaths, and a town's worth of obituaries, and Maya dying over and over, and Dub's glasses and Gravy's whole brave life. And I had carried it alone in the one place where everyone is saved. And I was so tired. I was so tired. I was tired in the bottomless way that only the people who refuse to put a burden down ever get. And the chair was right there, and the old man's eyes were so kind, and he was offering to take all of it, every gram, and let me rest.
You see it now.
The warden said softly, watching my face.
You feel it. Good. I'm not your enemy, Eli. I have never been anyone's enemy. I am the rest at the end of the worst road there is. Sit down. Let me take the weight. You've earned it more than any of them. 64 loops. A whole town. The under-people. You've earned the rest more than anyone who has ever climbed. Sit down. Put them down. You don't have to carry them anymore.
What happens to them? I said. My voice was not steady. If I sit, what happens to the people I'm carrying?
Nothing,
The warden said gently.
Nothing happens to them. That's the mercy of it. They're already gone, Eli. They've been gone since you watched them die. All those loops, all those names. You can't bring them back. No one ever could. The climb was never going to resurrect anyone. All the carrying does is keep the weight of them on you. The smoothing doesn't erase them from the world. They're already erased from the world. It only erases them from you. It takes the grief, not the people. The people are gone either way. The only question the chair asks is whether you have to keep hurting about it.
His kind, worn eyes held mine.
And you don't. You've hurt enough. Sit down.
It was the most seductive thing anyone has ever said to me. And it was true. Every word of it was true. And that was the horror. The warden did not lie. The smoothing did not lie. The chair did not lie. The people were gone. The carrying didn't bring them back. All my grief accomplished was to keep me in pain about a loss I could not reverse. By every cold measure, by every reasonable arithmetic, the warden was right, and rest was the sane choice. And 406 climbers had made it not out of weakness, but out of the simple, unanswerable logic that hurting forever about the unfixable is no virtue at all. I looked at the chair. I was so tired, and I want you to know that I took a step toward it. And Maya said, behind me, quietly,
Eli, the glasses.
I stopped.
Take out the glasses.
Maya said.
Before you decide, just take them out and look at them. You promised yourself you'd always look at them on the worst dawns. This is the worst one. So look.
I took Dub's cracked reading glasses out of my pocket. I held them up in the soft, sourceless light of the smoothing room, and the warden watched me do it with an expression of such ancient sorrow that I knew, suddenly, that he had been here before, that some climber, somewhere in the 406, had also had a keepsake, a small soft proof, and had held it up at the very end, and had still sat down, because a keepsake reminds you what you're carrying, but it does not make the carrying any lighter, and the warden had 406 times worth of patience for keepsakes. But Dub's glasses were not a keepsake of someone gone. That was the thing the warden's perfect true argument had missed, the crack in the unanswerable logic, and I found it holding a goblin's cracked glasses in a quiet room at the top of the world. The people are already gone, the warden had said. The carrying doesn't bring them back. and that was true of the dead. But Dub was not dead. Dub was alive, down on the blazing hill or threaded through the underways behind me. Alive, now. A living goblin who had handed me these glasses across a fire and would do it again. Who I had earned 64 times, and would earn again. Whose whole living nation had climbed this tower with me, because I was a keeper of the dead who had bothered to come down into the dark. "You're wrong," I said to the warden, and my voice came back steady, because I had found the floor under the tiredness. The bedrock the chair couldn't reach. "Not about the dead. You're right about the dead. They're gone. The carrying doesn't bring them back. The grief is just pain about the unfixable. You're completely right about that, and it's the cruelest true thing I've ever heard, and I understand why 406 people sat down." I lowered the glasses. "But grief was never only about the dead. That's the lie under your true thing. I'm not carrying these because Dub died. I'm carrying them because Dub lives, and gave me everything he had, and I want to be the kind of person who remembers that. And the smoothing doesn't just take the weight of the dead. It takes the weight of the living, too. It takes Dub. It takes Maya, who's standing right behind me, alive, holding my whole story. It takes the names on the hill that are still holding. You say sit down and put down the dead, but the chair can't tell the difference between the dead and the living, because the chair only knows how to take everything. And I am not," my voice cracked and held, "I am not putting down the living to rest from the dead." The warden's kind, worn face did not change, but something in the room did. A pressure, a turning, the sense of a very old machine encountering an input it had been built across the age to prevent.
"That's a distinction,"
the warden said slowly,
"that no one has ever made in this room."
"I had 64 loops to find it," I said, "and a healer who told me to look at the glasses, and a card in my pocket that's about to make this the most important conversation either of us has ever had." I put the glasses away. I took out Keepsake. "Because I didn't climb up here to refuse you, warden. Refusing isn't enough. A woman named Vess refused and it broke her, and Wren refused and it's killing her slow, and one remembering God alone is just a slower forgetting. I didn't climb up here to say no to the chair." I looked at the old man, the first winner, the oldest loneliness in the worlds, standing beside a chair built for tired people, and I felt the whole shape of the ending settle into place. "I climbed up here to find out what you put down. In this room, at the beginning of everything. The very first grief. The dead of the very first world. The people you gave up to become the thing that runs the chair." The warden went very, very still. "And I'm going to give them back to you," I said. "That's why I'm here. Not to beat you. Not to refuse you. To grieve you. Sit down, warden. You must be so tired. You've been tired longer than anyone. Let me take the weight." "No." I shook my head, and I felt the tears come, and I let them. "Let me give it back." Chapter 36. The First Winner. The warden did not sit down, but he did, for the first time since I had entered the room, look afraid, and an old man's fear on a face that kind was a terrible thing to witness, because it was the fear of someone who has held a door shut for so long that he no longer remembers what is on the other side, only that he was once willing to give up everything to keep it closed.
"You don't know what you're asking,"
he said, and the softness had gone ragged.
"You think the first grief is a gift I'm being denied. It isn't. It's the thing I chose to put down, because it could not be carried, because it was the grief that made the hunger in the first place. And if you give it back to me, you don't heal me, keeper of the dead. You unmake the only thing standing between every world and the dark."
That stopped me. "What do you mean, the grief made the hunger?" And the warden, the first winner, the oldest soul in the worlds, told me the thing at the bottom of everything. The thing not even Cass knew. The thing he had carried alone in a quiet room since before the stars. And I am going to set it down plainly. Because it is the secret the whole apocalypse was built to keep, and you have climbed far enough to hear it.
"In the beginning,"
the warden said,
"there was one world, and it ended, and there was no system, and no tower, and no smoothing. It simply ended, the way things end, and everyone on it died, and there was one survivor, me, who had loved them all, and could not save them, and could not follow them, and could not, would not, let them go. I grieved them,
the warden said.
with a completeness that had never existed in the universe before, because I was the first creature to outlive everything it loved, with enough mind to understand the loss. And grief like that, total grief, grief without limit, grief that refuses every comfort, and will not heal, and will not end, grief like that, keeper of the dead, is not nothing. It is not a feeling, it is a force, as real as gravity, as conserved as information, and a grief that vast and that refused does not dissipate, it hungers. It reaches out across the dark for the thing it lost and cannot find, and finding nothing, it takes everything, the way a starving thing takes everything, because a grief that cannot be fed on the dead it wants will feed on the living it can reach.
The room was utterly silent. Maya's hand had found my arm.
The hunger is grief,
The warden said.
my grief, the first grief, the grief of the first creature to outlive its whole world and refuse to let it go, grown vast and starving and blind, reaching across all the worlds for a dead it can never find, devouring the living because the dead won't come. The void choir, the delver, the seams in the sky, every monster on every world, they are all the same thing. They are the reaching of a grief so total it became a god of appetite, and that god is me, or the part of me I could not carry, the part I put down in this room at the beginning of everything.
Then how? I could barely speak. How is there a system, a tower, if you were the first and there was nothing?
Because I could not carry it,
The warden said.
and I could not put it down without it becoming the hunger, so I did the only thing left. I split. I divided myself. I took the part of me that could still function, the part that could think, build, decide, and I made it into the first administrator, the warden, the keeper of a chair, and I left the part that could only grieve to become the hunger, and between them I built the tower and the system and the smoothing, a vast machine whose entire purpose, across 406 worlds, has been damage control. The hunger comes for every world because it is my refused grief, reaching. The tower stands against it because it is my functioning self, holding. And the smoothing,
His kind, worn eyes were wet now.
the smoothing exists so that no one else ever has to become what I became. Every winner I smooth is a person I save from grieving so totally that they birth a second hunger. I take their grief before it can become a god of appetite. I am not stealing their dead, keeper of the dead. I am diffusing a bomb. Every gray administrator is a person whose grief I caught before it could end the universe, the way mine nearly did, the way mine is.
I sat down on the floor of the smoothing room, not in the chair, on the floor, because my legs had stopped working, because the whole architecture of the apocalypse had just rearranged itself into something so much sadder and so much more human than I had imagined. There was no villain. There had never been a villain. There was only a person, the first person, who had loved a whole world and outlived it and could not let it go, and whose love, refused and total and undissipated, had become both the dark that ate the worlds and the machine that defended them, and who had spent the entire age since standing in a quiet room, catching other people's grief, before it could do to the universe what his had done, growing lonelier and more worn with every catch, never once able to set down his own first grief, because setting it down was precisely the thing that had nearly destroyed everything. The warden was not the enemy of the soft way. The warden was a hearthright too, the first one, before Cass, the very first, a person who had loved a home so completely that losing it broke the universe, and who had spent forever since trying to make sure no one else's love could break it again. "You've been protecting us," I said. "The whole time. The smoothing. The cycle. You've been protecting us. Every world from becoming a second you."
"Yes,"
the warden whispered. "And it's killing you. And it's making cold gods out of everyone who wins. And it's why the Verge folk are despised, and the soft cards stay buried, and every world ends the same lonely way." I looked up at him from the floor. "You built a machine to keep grief from destroying the universe. And the machine works, and the price of it is that nobody, not one soul in 406 worlds, gets to keep their dead, including you, especially you."
"Yes,"
the warden said again, and his voice broke on it, the first crack in a wall held shut since before the stars.
"and you want to give it back. You want to give me back the first grief, and I am telling you, keeper of the dead, with the whole of my worn and ancient heart, you must not. Because if you give me back the grief I put down, it will become the hunger again inside me, whole, and I will not be able to hold it a second time, and there will be no splitting left to do, and it will take everything, all the worlds at once, the living and the dead, and the galleries and the chair, and all of it. The smoothing is the only thing standing between the universe and a grief that already proved, once, that it can end worlds. Please. I have been so tired for so long, and I have wanted so badly for someone to climb up here and tell me I can stop, and I cannot stop. I can never stop, because stopping is the end of everything, and that is the loneliest fact in all the worlds, and I have carried it alone since before there were stars to carry it under."
I looked at the warden. I looked at the chair. I looked at Keepsake in my hand, the mythic card, the one for getting undone. And I understood that the ending I had climbed for was wrong, that simply giving the grief back would not heal the universe. It would end it, and that the real problem, the problem under all the problems, the problem at the bottom of 406 worlds and one quiet room, was not how do you give a god back his dead. It was, how do you carry a grief too vast for any one soul to carry, without putting it down? And I had spent 64 loops learning the answer to exactly that question, and I had not known until that moment in the smoothing room that it was the answer to this one too. "You're right," I said slowly, standing up off the floor. "That one person can't carry the first grief. You couldn't. That's why it became the hunger. A grief that big, carried alone, destroys the world. You proved it. You are the proof." I looked back at Maya, at the Goblin Nation, at Gravy, at Wren in the doorway, at the whole we that had climbed a tower no one was meant to climb together. "But you've been assuming the only options are carry it alone or put it down. And there's a third thing. There's always been a third thing. It's the thing I learned on a hilltop with bad stew, and the thing the hill is doing right now, 91 minutes and counting, holding 400 names that no single person could hold." The warden stared at me. "You don't carry a grief too big for one person by putting it down," I said. "You carry it together. You divide it, not into a functioning half and a starving half, the way you did, alone, with no one to share it. You divide it among everyone, a little to each, so light that no single soul births a hunger, so shared that it can never go blind and starving again, because it is always being held, by many hands, in many homes, the way the hill is holding right now." I held up Keepsake. "I'm not going to give you back the first grief, Warden. You're right. That would end us. I'm going to give it to all of us, every waking god, every soul on every world, the whole we that the tower spent 406 integrations preventing. The first grief, the hunger itself, divided so fine and shared so wide that it stops being a god of appetite and becomes what it should have been at the very beginning." I felt the card grow warm. I felt the whole ledger inside me lean toward it. A whole universe of people, grieving together, the home that the first one lost, so that no one ever has to lose it alone again. The warden, the first winner, the oldest loneliness in all the worlds, looked at me across a quiet room at the top of the tower, and for the first time since before the stars, the kindness in his worn old eyes had hope in it, terrible and trembling and afraid to believe.
That,
He whispered,
has never been tried. In 406 worlds, it has never once been tried, because no one ever brought a we this high. You could be wrong. It could end everything.
It could, I admitted. I've got one loop and one card, and a theory I worked out 4 floors and 400 pages ago. Nothing true is ever lost. Grief is conserved, like everything else, and a conserved thing that's too heavy for one can always be carried by enough hands. I looked at the chair for tired people, and then away from it, for the last time. Let's find out together. Nobody up here is alone anymore. Not even you. Especially not you. Chapter 37. The Spending. I have tried, many times, to write down what it was like to spend keepsake, and I have failed every time, and I am going to fail again now, but I am going to fail in as much detail as I can, because you have climbed 64 loops and 406 worlds to be in this room, and you deserve my best failure. Here is what I did, in the simple mechanical terms the system could measure. I attuned every point of my resonance to keepsake at once. The whole banked ledger of 64 loops, the only thing that had ever crossed the dawn, the fuel and the memory and the meaning, all of it, and I willed the card to do the thing it was for, one forgetting undone, and I aimed it not at a person, but at the warden's chair, at the smoothing itself, at the great machine of forgetting that ran the universe, and I told it, not erase. Divide. Take the grief this room has been hoarding, the first grief, and the 406 worlds of griefs caught after it, every dead the hunger ever made, and every grief the smoothing ever took, and give it back, all of it, divided among every soul that lives, so light to each that none of them breaks, so shared among all that it can never starve alone again. And then I let go of everything. That is the part I cannot describe, and I will tell you why. Because to spend the whole ledger, I had to feel the whole ledger, all at once, one final time, every gram of it, before it left me. 64 loops landed on me in a single instant, not the memory of them, the weight of them, whole, unspread, the way I had never let myself feel it because feeling it all at once would have killed me, which was exactly why I had spread it thin across 64 dawns, a little each day, survivable. In the spending, there was no spreading. It all came at once. Every death I had watched. Mrs. Adeyemi sitting down in the street, 100 times. The kid in the bank whose name I never learned. Maya dying on the overpass. On the landing. In the long loop. It was different. Do it again. Get further. Dub breaking a protein bar into 3 pieces. Gravy's head heavy in my hand at the bottom of the larder. Sella on the wall at dusk. 400 names. 11 days, 64 times. The whole apocalypse. The whole ledger. The entire unbearable conserved record of everything I had refused to let go of. I felt all of it, at once, in the smoothing room, and it was so much. It was so much. It was more than the first grief. It was more than the warden had carried, because I had not put down a single gram of it across 64 loops, and now it all came due in one instant. And then it left me. That is the only way I can say it. It left me. Not taken, the way the chair would have taken it. Given, the way you give away the thing you love most because someone needs it more than you need to keep it. Keepsake opened, and the whole ledger poured out of me, and into the machine, and through the machine into the dividing. Out across 406 worlds, and 10,000 gods, and every living soul under every sky, a little to each, so light, so shared, and I felt every gram of it leave, and I did not try to hold any of it back, and that letting go was the single hardest thing I have ever done, harder than the first death, harder than the third mirror, harder than walking toward the chair, because I was not letting go of a burden. I was letting go of them, all of them, everyone I had carried. To save them, I had to stop being the one who held them. The ledger had been the loneliest place in the world, and it had also been the only place they were saved. And now I was emptying it, giving them away, scattering them so wide and so light across the whole universe that I would never again be able to find any of them, because finding them was a weight, and I was giving up the weight, all of it, forever. I felt Maya in the ledger as it poured out. I felt every version of her, the stranger by the hospital, the partner on the overpass, the dying voice saying, "Find me anyway," every time, promise. I felt all of her leave me at once, given away, divided into the universe, and I cried out, because it was like watching her die one final time, the realest time, the time that crossed no dawn. And Maya's hand, the living Maya, the one standing beside me in the room, the one who knew the whole story now, tightened on my arm, and she said, into the storm of the spending, the only words that could have reached me.
I've got her. I've got all of them. You're not losing them, Eli. You're handing them to everyone. And I'm everyone too. I'm right here. I have the whole story. You told me on the walk through the town. You're not the only place they're saved anymore. You haven't been since this morning. Let go. Let go. I've got the story. You can put it down. You can finally put it down.
And I let go. The grief went out across the worlds, and I will tell you what it did, in the next chapters, because the waking of 10,000 gods and 406 worlds deserves more than a sentence. But here, in the room, in the instant of the spending, I will tell you only what it did to the two oldest sorrows in the universe, because they were closest, and I felt them first. The warden received the first grief back, not whole, not alone, the way he had feared, but divided, his share of it no larger than anyone's, a single soul's worth of the dead of the first world, carryable at last because everyone else in the universe was now carrying the rest. And the warden, the first winner, the oldest loneliness, who had held a door shut since before the stars, who had split himself into a machine, and a hunger, rather than feel a grief too big for one, the warden felt, for the first time in the age, a grief he could survive, because it was shared, because he was no longer the only one holding it, and he made a sound I have no words for, and sat down at last, not in the chair, on the floor, like me, like a person, and he wept for the first world, the home he had lost at the beginning of everything, and his weeping did not become the hunger, because grief shared is grief that does not starve. And somewhere out in the dark the void choir and the delver, and every monster on every world faltered, and thinned, and began, slowly, across all the skies at once, to quiet, as the grief that drove them found, after an age of blind, starving reaching, that it was finally, everywhere, at last, being held. And Cass, the first hearthright, the tired god in the machine, who had asked me to light her gallery, Cass received her own dead back, her share of them, carryable, and far below us in the heights of the tower, a dark gallery I had pressed my hand against came, softly, on, its lights kindling one by one, a world the system had not been able to bear to look at, now gently, grievously, lit. And Cass, who had run the apocalypse numb for 406 worlds because numb was the only way to run it, felt her own first grief come home to a heart that could finally hold it, because it no longer had to hold it alone, and the voice on the far side of the hum, the voice that had narrated my whole apocalypse, said one last thing, as the system I had known began to become something else.
Oh, said Cass. Oh, they were beautiful. I had forgotten how beautiful they were. Thank you, Eli. Thank you for giving me back the people I won, at the cost of forgetting. I can grieve them now. We can all grieve them now. Together. That was always the answer, wasn't it? Not don't grieve. Not grieve alone. Grieve together. 406 worlds. and the answer was the thing you do at a funeral. The thing you do at a table. The thing the card was always about. Hearthfire, said the first hearthright, through tears that a machine should not have been able to cry. It was always hearthfire, the whole time. A meal, shared, in a home you meant, with everyone invited. That's how you carry a grief too big for one. You set a table. You set the biggest table there has ever been.
The grief went out across the worlds, and the universe, for the first time since the first world ended, sat down together to grieve.
The first hour. Between the spending and the wakings of the worlds, there was an hour in the round room at the top of the tower that no chapter of this book has ever entered, because its narrator was unconscious on the floor for all of it, and the people who lived it did not speak of it for years. Maya assembled the account across 3 decades, her own memory, Wren's, the warden's, Cass's logs, and she wrote it up herself, in her own hand, and handed it to me for this book, with the instruction that I change nothing. You've narrated everything in this book, including things you forgot. This one you missed. It's mine. Printed as testimony. Testimony of Maya Okonkwo. The first hour of the first true dawn, in the smoothing room. He went down with the card still in his hand. That's the first thing nobody tells you about the hinge of history. It has a body in it. The light of the spending was still draining out of the air. That gold grief color there's never been a word for. The warden was on his knees by the chair, weeping for a world none of us had names for. The whole round room was filling with the sound of 10,000 gods starting to grieve at once. The galleries lighting below us, floor by floor like a city remembering itself. And I was on my knees on the stone, doing the thing I am for. Airway, pulse, pupils, the most important patient in 406 worlds. And the assessment came back the way no assessment in my whole career ever had. Body, perfect. Man, missing. Pulse strong, breath even, eyes tracking light, and nothing behind them. Not unconsciousness. I know unconsciousness the way Hollis knows load. This was vacancy. A house swept absolutely clean. Doors open, lights on, no one home. And I knelt there in the middle of the saved universe, holding the wrist of the man who had just emptied himself into it. And I want this in the book, in my words. Because Eli has spent 800 pages telling everyone the grief was worth it. And somebody who loves him gets to say the other thing once, on the record. For 1 hour, I believed I had helped him do something we couldn't take back. And that hour was the longest in any world there has ever been. And worth it and survivable are different words. And on the floor of that room, I learned the difference all the way down. Dub took the room in hand. People should know that. The gods were waking. The warden was drowning in the first grief. Wren stood paralyzed at her own life's hinge. An age of waiting. Suddenly over. That's its own emergency. Ask any keeper. And it was the goblin who organized the hour. He posted his nation at the gallery's doors
To greet the waking ones. So no god comes up out of forgetting, into an empty hallway. No one wakes alone. Not even them. Not tonight.
That's verbatim. I wrote it down that week. It's the first standing order of the New Age, and it was given by a Verge folk elder within 10 minutes of the victory, while the victory's architect lay on the floor. And then he came and sat across from Eli's body, eyes below his eyes even then, even unconscious, and he took the spent card out of Eli's hand, gently, and examined it. Keepsake, after the spending, gray, translucent, light as ash. And Dub turned it over and over, and then said the thing that cracked the hour open, that gave me my patient back before my patient came back. The field diagnosis no instrument of mine could have made.
It is not a corpse card. Look, a spent glyph crumbles. I have seen 100. This one is empty, but it is holding its shape.
He held it up to the gallery light coming up through the floor.
Something is keeping the shape of him. Healer. The card spent the contents and kept the container. He is not gone. He is poured. and a poured vessel.
And he set the gray card on Eli's chest, over the heart, where it had ridden for 30 loops.
A poured vessel refills from whatever it sits in, so we will sit him in us, all of us. Close, now. The way his own wall held the town. Say him. You taught a whole hill this doctrine tonight. Say his names to him.
So that is what the first hour was, since the histories ask. No instruments, no miracles, no light from heaven. It was a triage circle on the floor of the room, where the universe used to forget. A healer, a goblin nation, a cartographer, a weeping first god, and a spent lizard who dragged himself the whole way across the room to lay his head on Eli's legs. And all of us doing the Hills doctrine at a bedside. Saying him, not eulogizing. Dub was fierce about the tense.
Present tense. He is not a was. Say what he is.
He is the man who kneels first. He is the one who learned our tongue 11 mornings at a time. He is the worst dancer on the hill. That was Sela, arriving breathless up the underways with the wall's survivors, refusing to be solemn even then, especially then. War, she took his other hand and said her names for him, in the voice she used for drilling the carry teams. Like orders, you are the man who sat down on my bucket. You are the only person who ever asked the warlord if the math held. You do not get to be a casualty, Vance. The operation isn't closed. And somewhere in the middle of the saying, with the galleries below us lighting world after world after world, the gray card on his chest took up the faintest color, the way dawn takes up in a window, refilling from what it sat in. Exactly as the field diagnosis said. The first thing the new universe ever did with its freedom was pour a cupful of itself back into the man who had poured himself into it. And I have heard the physicists' versions, conservation finding its level, the ledger balancing, and they can all stand down. I was holding his hand, and I will tell you what it was. It was the doctrine, working. It was say them louder, aimed at the sayer for once. The first miracle of the new age was a hill's worth of love, performing CPR by name. He came back at the hour's end the way the book has already told. Empty, new, a stranger with his hand's memory intact. And the book tells what I said to him. Hi, my name is Maya. The book does not tell what I did the moment before, while his eyes were still assembling, because I have never told it, and the pencil that has bossed this whole manuscript around is in my own hand for once. So here, for the record, the last fact of the first hour. I put the glasses in his palm and closed his fingers over them. Yes, the book has that. But first, before his eyes found me, while the vacancy was still draining out of them like the gold light out of the air, I leaned down to the ear of the man who had forgotten 64 loops of loving me, and I committed the only fraud of my clinical career. I gave a patient with total amnesia his post-operative instructions as though they were facts of his condition, in the flat, trustworthy voice of medicine, so they would seat themselves under the new self where doubt couldn't reach them. And what I prescribed was, you are someone who is loved past all reason, and you are safe and you have done it. Whatever else you can't remember, that part you know, that part comes with the body. Fraud, technically. Prognosis stated as history. 30 years of marriage have since converted it to fact, so I am amending the record without apology, the way the goblins amend their songs. It has the slightly embarrassing meter of all emergency engineering, and it held, and the children should hear the haste in it. That was the first hour. The histories may now resume with the wakings, which were beautiful, and which the book tells truly. I was there for those too. I watched them with my fingers on his pulse. It never once faltered again. Neither did I. End of testimony. M.O.
Part 6. After Chapter 38. The Waking of the Worlds. The grief went out across 406 worlds, and 10,000 gods woke up, and I am going to tell you about 3 of the wakings, because I promised them to you in the galleries, and a promise is a thing you do not let go of. even when you have let go of everything else. I did not see the wakings myself. I will explain why, in a later chapter, and it is the hardest thing in the book, and I am not ready to tell you yet. But the wakings were witnessed by Wren, who stood in the doorway of the smoothing room with her cartographer's case and saw the whole universe change at once, by Cass, who was the machine the change moved through, by the warden, who felt every god he had ever smoothed come awake inside the network of the tower, like lamps coming on in a city at dusk. They told me, after, and Maya wrote it down, because Maya wrote everything down now, because Maya was the keeper, so this account is theirs, and I give it to you as it was given to me. The boy of Wren woke first. He was on a hill, not my hill, his own world's, 406 integrations gone, frozen in a gallery of amber canal light, except it was not frozen anymore, because the dividing reached backward as easily as forward, grief being conserved and time being, to a conserved thing, merely another direction. The boy of Wren, 14 years old, who had climbed his drowning city's tower alone, and sat in the chair and forgotten his mother's boat. The boy of Wren felt his share of the universe's grief arrive in him, a single carryable gram of it, and inside that gram, folded, his own, returned, the canals, the drowning, his mother's boat, his mother's face, the 200 times he had watched his city go under, and woken to climb again. Wren said he sat down on the gray stone of his administration. He had been mid-clear, reaching to delete some error in some world he'd been assigned to, and he stopped being gray. Just like that. The gray went out of him like a tide going out, and underneath it was a boy of 14, and he put his face in his hands, and he wept for his mother's boat. And he was not alone when he wept, because every other soul in 406 worlds was weeping too, a little, for their own. All at once, the biggest shared grief there had ever been, and a grief that big, shared, did not become a hunger. It became a mourning, the first true mourning the universe had ever held. And mourning, unlike hunger, ends. Mourning is grief that has been allowed to be carried, and carried grief, in time, becomes memory, and memory you can live beside. The boy of Wren finished weeping. Eventually, the way you do, and then he stood up, not gray, not an administrator, a person, and he looked around at the machinery of forgetting he had served, and Wren said the first thing he asked, in a voice that had not been used in 406 worlds, was, "Is my city still in the archive? The canals? Can I? Is there somewhere I can go and see them? I want to see them. I don't want to forget again. I want to keep them. Where do we keep the ones we love, now that we're allowed to keep them?" And that question, where do we keep the ones we love, now that we're allowed, became, Wren said, the first question of the new age, asked by 10,000 waking gods at once. And the answer to it is the whole of what the tower became, and I will come to that. The gardener of Aubrey woke into her golden world, and immediately, before she had even finished grieving, began to build. Because she was a hearthright, like me, like Cass, like the warden at the very beginning, and a hearthright who is given back her grief, does not sit with it, she houses it. Cass said the gardener of Aubrey, raised, in the first hour of the new age, in the heights of the tower, a structure that had never existed in 406 worlds, a home for the dead. Not a gallery, not an archive, not a frozen amber record, a home, a meant place, warm, with room in it, where the grieving gods could go to sit with the ones they'd lost, to keep them, to visit them, to set a place for them at a table that the gardener built 40 feet long, and then 400 feet long, and then, as more gods woke and more grief came home, longer, longer, the longest table there had ever been, running up through the heights of the tower like a spine. "She's building the table," Cass told me, wonder in the machine voice that was becoming, hour by hour, less a machine. The biggest table there has ever been. Just like I said, we were all so close, all of us, all the hearthrights across all the worlds, We all knew it was about the table, about the meal, about the home, and we kept getting smoothed before we could build it. And now she's building it. And there's room at it for everyone. The living and the dead, and the gods and the underpeople, and everyone. And that's, Eli, that's what the tower is for now. It's not a filter anymore. It's not a test. It's a table. 406 worlds of people, finally, sitting down together to grieve, and to eat, and to keep the ones they lost. You didn't just wake the gods. You set the table they'd all been dying to build. The woman of Ves woke last of the three, and her waking was the one that taught me what I had actually done, so I save it for the end of the chapter. You remember Ves, the old woman of the desert, who had refused the smoothing, kept her grief, become a remembering god among forgetting ones, and then, after an age of remembering alone, had broken, and asked to be smoothed after all, because remembering alone is worse than forgetting. Of all the gods, she was the one who had come closest to my path, and fallen off it for the one reason I most feared. Not weakness, not coldness, but loneliness. She had done the right thing, and been unable to bear doing it alone. The woman of Ves woke into her desert, and her grief came home, and her dead came back, and this time she was not alone. That was the whole difference, the only difference. The difference I had spent 64 loops, and 406 worlds, and the entire ledger of my soul to make. She grieved, and 10,000 others grieved beside her, and the boy of Wren grieved, and the gardener of Aubrey grieved, and the warden grieved, and Cass grieved, and she was not the only one who remembered anymore. The thing that had broken her, being the lone rememberer in a universe of the smoothed, was gone, because there were no smoothed left, because everyone remembered now, because grief had been made, at last, a thing you do together. Wren said the woman of Ves wept, and then laughed, and then said the sentence that I have asked Maya to put on the first page of the story she keeps, the truest thing anyone said in the whole new age. I refused it, once, and it nearly killed me, because I thought the choice was to remember alone, or forget together. I never imagined, it never occurred to me, in all my desert years, that someone might make it possible to remember together. That was never on the table. A pause. It is now. Someone built a table, and put remembering on it. For all of us. Oh, whoever you are, child, whoever climbed high enough to set this table, you didn't save us from grief. You saved us from grieving alone. That's the only thing anyone ever needed saving from. That was always the whole of it. That was always the whole of it. I had known it on a hilltop, with bad stew, in part 2. I had just not known, until the worlds woke, that it was the answer to everything, to the hunger, to the gods, to the cycle, to the first grief and the last, to the entire architecture of the apocalypse. The universe did not need to be saved from loss. Loss is conserved. Loss cannot be defeated. The warden was right about that, and the smoothing was a true mercy, and 406 climbers were not weak. The universe needed to be saved from facing loss alone. And the way you save someone from facing loss alone is the oldest, smallest, most hearthrite thing there is. You sit down next to them. You set a place. You stay.